Son looked me dead in the eyes, pointed at the door and said, "This isn't working, Mum. You need to find somewhere else to be." Then he turned around and walked back into the kitchen, my kitchen, where his wife was standing with her arms crossed, nodding slowly like she'd just watched something she'd been waiting a very long time to see. I was 63 years old. I was standing in the hallway of the house I paid off myself, the house where I raised him, the house where his father died, in the back bedroom 11 years ago. And my son was telling me to leave. I didn't cry. I didn't yell. I picked up my purse from the hook by the door, the same hook I'd screwed into the wall myself in 1998, and I walked out. What I didn't know was that the worst part wasn't behind me. It was still coming. Let me go back a bit, because none of this happened overnight. My name is Lorraine, and I've lived in the same house in Barrie, Ontario for 31 years. It's a 3-bedroom bungalow on a quiet crescent, nothing fancy, but it's mine. My late husband, Gordon. No, wait, I can't use that. My late husband passed away from a heart attack in 2013. We paid off the mortgage together the year before he died, which at the time felt like a milestone worth celebrating. Afterward, it felt more like a mercy. At least I wouldn't have to worry about keeping a roof over my head. I worked as an administrative coordinator at a local healthcare clinic for 22 years. I retired at 61, comfortable but not wealthy. I had my pension, a bit of RRSP savings, and the house. That was my security. That was everything. My son, who I'll call my son because that's what matters here, was 34 when all of this started. He'd been with his girlfriend. I'll call her my daughter-in-law because they did eventually marry, just before the worst of it for about 3 years. I liked her well enough at first. She was sharp, well-spoken, worked in property management. We weren't close, but we were polite. She called me by my first name, which I didn't love, but I let it go. They were living in a rented apartment in Vaughan and, according to my son, struggling with the cost of living. That's not a lie. Rent in the GTA had become genuinely crushing. When he called me in the spring of 2022 and asked if they could move in just temporarily, I understood the pressure he was under. He said 6 months, maybe 8, just until they saved enough for a down payment. I said yes. Of course I said yes. He's my child. I should have asked more questions. I should have written something down. I should have done a lot of things. The first few weeks were fine. They brought their furniture, some of it nicer than mine, and my son helped fix a few things around the house that I'd been putting off. My daughter-in-law cooked dinner twice in the first week and brought me a candle from that overpriced shop on Dunlop Street. I thought, okay, this might actually work. Then things began to shift, slowly enough that I kept talking myself out of noticing. My daughter-in-law started rearranging the kitchen. Not dramatically at first, just moving things to make more sense, she said. The mugs went to a different cabinet. The good cutting board disappeared into a drawer I never used. Then the spices got reorganized alphabetically, and my favorite cast iron pan ended up on the bottom shelf, where I couldn't reach it without bending down. "It's just more efficient," she told me when I mentioned it. I said nothing. They were guests. I was being flexible. By the second month, she had started referring to the house as our place when she talked to people on the phone. I heard her once from the hallway, telling someone, "Oh, we have plenty of room at our place." I stood there for a moment, then went back to my room. My room, that's the other thing. My bedroom is the primary at the back of the house, bigger with an ensuite. When they moved in, they took the second bedroom, which made sense. But by month 3, my daughter-in-law started making comments. "It must be so much work to heat that big room. You probably don't even use that ensuite much anymore, do you? It would be so much easier for us if—" "No," I said, flat out. First time I'd said it clearly since they arrived. She smiled and said, "Of course, absolutely, I completely understand." But the comments didn't stop. They just got quieter. What I didn't realize was that while I was busy being flexible, she was being strategic. My daughter-in-law worked in property management. She knew things about housing law, about tenant rights. about how quickly a casual living arrangement could shift into something with legal weight behind it. I didn't know any of that. Why would I? It was my house. By month 4, they had stopped mentioning the move-out timeline entirely. When I brought it up one Sunday afternoon, gently, asking how the savings were going, my son got defensive. "We're doing our best, Mum. Do you want us on the street?" It came out sharp, which surprised me. That wasn't the boy I knew. I backed off. I told myself he was stressed. They started having people over without asking. Friends I'd never met, staying late, leaving glasses on the coffee table I'd had since my husband and I'd bought it at an estate sale in Aurelia. Once I came downstairs at 10:30 at night because I couldn't sleep, and there were 4 people I didn't know, sitting in my living room watching something loud on my television. I introduced myself. One of them looked at my daughter-in-law and said, "Is this your aunt?" She laughed. "Something like that." I went back upstairs. The turn happened in the fall. I'd been feeling off for a few weeks, tired in a way I couldn't shake, and my doctor suggested I get some blood work done and try to reduce stress. I told my son I wasn't feeling well. He nodded and said he hoped I felt better, and that was more or less the end of that conversation. What I noticed around that same time was that my mail had been moved. I kept it in a small basket on the hall table, always had. Suddenly, the basket was gone, and my mail was in a pile on the kitchen counter, opened. Not all of it, but some. When I asked about it, my daughter-in-law said she'd accidentally opened a couple because she thought they were hers. Mistakes happen. But the ones that had been opened included a statement from my financial institution and a letter from my insurance company. I felt something cold move through me when I realized that. I called my friend Beverly, and told her what was happening. Bev had been my closest friend since our kids were in school together. She's the kind of person who says what she sees. No softening. "Lorraine," she said, "you need to talk to someone. Not just me, someone who knows about this stuff." "It's probably nothing," I said. "It's probably not nothing," she said. "Get yourself a legal consultation. Most places offer a free one." I told her I'd think about it. I didn't do it right away. That's one of my regrets. Things accelerated in November. My daughter-in-law announced, without asking, that she was going to renovate the main bathroom. She had a vision, she said, and she'd already priced out the tile. My son backed her up. "The bathroom is pretty outdated, Mum. It'll add value to the house." "It's not your house," I said, clearly, calmly. The silence that followed lasted about 5 seconds. "We're trying to improve it," my son said, his voice careful. "You should be grateful we're putting in the effort." Grateful. I stared at him. He looked away first. I told them there would be no renovations without my written permission, and that they should think very seriously about a move-out date. My son got up and left the room. My daughter-in-law smiled at me, a very thin smile, and said, "We'll talk about this later when everyone's calmer." Later that night, I heard them arguing through the wall. I caught pieces. Her voice sharp and certain. "She can't stop us." His voice quieter, less sure. "She owns the house, though." Her voice again, not for long. I lay awake for a long time after that. In December, I went to look for my copy of the house deed. I keep important documents in a locked, fireproof box in my bedroom closet. The box was there. The lock looked fine. But when I opened it, the deed was not where I put it. It was there, but it had been moved, placed under other papers, and there was a slight crease in the corner that hadn't been there before. Someone had been in that box. I called Bev the next morning. This time she didn't let me equivocate. "You need a lawyer. This week. Not next week. Not after the holidays. This week." I called a family law clinic in Barrie that a colleague had once mentioned. They referred me to a real estate lawyer in town who handled property disputes. I got an appointment for the following Thursday. I didn't tell my son or my daughter-in-law. I went by myself in the afternoon while they were both at work. I told my lawyer everything. She listened without interrupting, asked a few very specific questions, and then told me something that made my stomach drop. If they've been living in your home for over a year without a formal written agreement, they may have tenant rights under Ontario's Residential Tenancies Act. Evicting them, even as the homeowner, would require formal notice and potentially a hearing at the landlord and tenant board. I hadn't paid them rent. They hadn't paid me rent. There was no lease. None of that mattered as much as I thought it did. What can I do? I asked. Document everything, she said. From this point forward, write down dates, incidents, conversations, and if you have any reason to believe someone has accessed your financial accounts or personal documents without authorization, we need to look at that very carefully. I drove home in a kind of numb quiet. I sat in the car in my own driveway for 10 minutes before going inside. January was the month it broke open. I had noticed over the holidays that my son had become someone I didn't fully recognize. He used to be gentle. He used to call me every Sunday when he lived in Vaughan, whether there was anything to say or not. Somewhere in the past year, that person had been replaced by someone harder, someone who spoke to me with a flatness that frightened me. It was a Thursday evening. I'd made dinner, nothing elaborate, just a pasta bake, and set 3 places at the table the way I always did. My daughter-in-law came home, looked at the table, and said she'd already eaten. Fine. My son came home 20 minutes later, looked at the table, and said he wasn't hungry. I ate alone, which was fine. I was used to it. But when I went to rinse my plate, my daughter-in-law was in the kitchen and she said, casually, like she was mentioning the weather, "We're thinking of converting your bedroom into a proper master suite. We'd move you to the small room. It makes more sense, spatially." I set my plate down very carefully. "That is my bedroom," I said. "This is my house. That is not happening. It's the most logical use of the space." "No." She looked at me for a long moment. Then she called out to my son. He came into the kitchen, and they stood together, the 2 of them, and my son said it. "This isn't working, Mum. You need to find somewhere else to be." That was the moment I told you about at the beginning. I went to Bev's house. She lived 12 minutes away, in a subdivision off Essa Road. I pulled into her driveway and sat there until she came out and opened my car door. "Come inside," she said. "I'll put the kettle on." We sat at her kitchen table for 3 hours. I told her everything, not just the events, but what it felt like. How it felt like grief. How it felt like losing my husband all over again. That particular kind of loneliness that has no name because you're not allowed to be surprised by it when it's your own family doing it to you. Bev listened. Then she said, "You're not going back there as long as they're in the house, and tomorrow we're calling your lawyer." We did. My lawyer moved quickly once she understood the full picture. The access mail potential fraud, the tampered documents. She said to get the deed to her immediately so it could be examined. She also suggested I contact Service Canada and my financial institutions to flag my accounts, change my passwords, and request notification of any unusual activity. What came back from the bank made everything very concrete, very fast. There had been an attempt, unsuccessful because I had 2-step verification turned on, to access my online banking. 3 attempts, in fact, over 2 days in December. The IP address on the attempt traced back to my own home Wi-Fi network. That's when we involved the police. I want to say something here because I know what some people think when they hear a story like this. They think, why did she let it go on so long? Why didn't she say something sooner? What was wrong with her? I've thought about this a lot, sitting in Bev's guest room in the weeks that followed. The truth is that my daughter-in-law was very good at making me feel like I was overreacting. Every time I noticed something wrong, she had an explanation. Every time I pushed back, she framed it as me being difficult, me being rigid, me being unwilling to adapt to having family around. And my son. My son backed her up every single time. When the person who is supposed to know you best in the world tells you you're being unreasonable, it takes root. You start to wonder. It is not a character flaw to want to believe your child loves you. It is not weakness to try to preserve a relationship. The failure here was not mine. I need to say that plainly, because for a long time I couldn't. The landlord and tenant board process was not fast. My lawyer filed for eviction on the grounds of the attempted financial fraud and the documented pattern of harassment and coercion. Because there was a police file now, it moved faster than it might have otherwise. We also submitted records of the unauthorized mail opening, photographs of the fireproof box showing signs of tampering, and written accounts of specific incidents with dates. My son called me twice during this period. The first call, he was angry. He said I was destroying the family, that I was putting legal action ahead of relationships, that his wife was devastated and I should be ashamed. I listened. I let him say all of it. Then I said, "I love you. That has never changed. But you stood in my hallway and told me to leave my own home. You stood beside your wife while she told me she was going to take my bedroom. Whatever comes next, you started it, not me." He hung up. The second call came 10 days later. He sounded different, quieter. He said he'd been talking to someone, a counselor, I think, and that he was starting to understand some things. He didn't apologize, not yet, but he said, "I don't think I handled things well." It wasn't enough, but it was something. The day my daughter-in-law left is a day I will not forget for the rest of my life. The board had granted the eviction order. They had 30 days to vacate, which my lawyer said was faster than typical, given the associated police report. I was staying at Bev's, keeping my distance from the house, following my lawyer's advice to let the process happen without direct confrontation. Bev drove me past the house on a Saturday afternoon, not to stop, just to look, see if there were signs they were packing. They were not packing. They were in the backyard. Music playing loud. I could hear it from the street, some kind of upbeat pop song that sounded bizarrely cheerful. My daughter-in-law was there with two women I'd never seen, and they had a bottle of something and plastic cups, and they were laughing. Bev slowed the car. My daughter-in-law raised her cup and said something to the other women, and they all laughed again. I couldn't hear what she said, but I could see her face, and it was the face of someone celebrating. Bev looked at me. "Do you want me to keep driving?" "Stop the car," I said. I got out. I walked up my own front path. I put my key in my own front door. The music was loud enough in the backyard that they didn't hear me come in. I stood in my own hallway for a moment, looking at the hook where my purse used to hang, the one I'd screwed in myself in 1998. Then I walked through the house to the back door, and I opened it. The music kept playing for a second or two before my daughter-in-law turned and saw me standing in the doorway. The look on her face was something I will carry with me always. Not because it gave me satisfaction, though I won't pretend it didn't, but because in that moment I saw something very clearly. She had genuinely believed she'd won. She had already decided the house was hers. The party was real. The relief was real. She had not expected the door to open. "I have an eviction order," I said. "My lawyer's number is on the kitchen counter if you have questions. You have until the 30th. I went back inside. I sat at my own kitchen table. Bev came in behind me and sat across from me and didn't say a word, just put her hand over mine. They were out by the 28th, 2 days early, which I think says everything. My son did not come to see me after they left. That was the hardest part, if I'm being honest. Not the house, not the legal process, not the money I spent on lawyers. The hardest part was understanding that my son had made choices I couldn't explain away anymore. He called in March. He'd separated from his wife, or they were taking space. He was vague about it. He wanted to talk. I said I'd meet him for coffee, neutral ground, at Tim Hortons near his new place. We sat across from each other for almost 2 hours. He told me some things about what had happened, about patterns he'd started to recognize, about feeling like he'd been managed without realizing it. I believed him. I also knew that believing him didn't erase anything. "I don't know how to fix this," he said. "You start by not expecting me to pretend it didn't happen," I told him. He nodded. He looked tired. He looked like my son again, a little the one I'd known before all of this. "We're not where we were. I don't know if we ever will be, but we talk now, every couple of weeks, short calls, careful ones. It's the beginning of something, even if I'm not sure what. I'm back in my house. I repainted the kitchen in April, a warm yellow that my husband always wanted, but we could never agree on. Turns out I love it. I put my cast iron pan back where it belongs. The mugs are where I like them. The hall table is back in the corner with a small basket for the mail. My lawyer's bill was significant, more than I'd wanted to spend. But she told me early on, this house is your security. Protecting it is not an extravagance. She was right. I've talked to a few friends since all of this who have children asking to move in, and I said the same thing to each of them. Write it down. If family comes to live with you, write down the terms. How long? What they pay, even if it's only a token amount. What the exit plan looks like, not because you don't trust your children, but because clarity protects both of you. Love is not paperwork, but it doesn't hurt to have paperwork too. The house is quiet now. Some days that's exactly what I need. Some days I sit at the kitchen table with my tea, and the quiet is very full of all the things I've lost few years. My husband, the version of my son I thought I knew, a year of feeling like a stranger in my own home. But I'm still here. My name is on the deed. The locks are new. The yellow walls are exactly right. And the hook by the front door, the one I put up myself in 1998, still holds my purse right where it should be. The image I keep coming back to is my daughter-in-law raising that plastic hut in my backyard, laughing, music playing loud enough that she didn't hear the door. She was so certain. That's the part that stays with me. Not the anger, not the legal fees, not even the months of sleeping in Bev's guest room. It's the certainty she had. She genuinely believed that patience and pressure and slow erosion were enough to take something that wasn't hers. And for a while, they almost were. I've thought a lot about what allowed that to happen, and I've had to be honest with myself in ways that weren't comfortable. I was not naive. I was not stupid. But I kept choosing accommodation over clarity, kept softening the edges of things that deserved a sharper look. Every time something felt wrong, I found a reason to let it go. That impulse came from a good place. I didn't want to damage my relationship with my son, didn't want to be the difficult mother-in-law, didn't want to make trouble in my own home. But what I was really doing was trading my own judgment for the hope that things would sort themselves out. They don't sort themselves out. I know that now. Things go in the direction you allow them to go, and if you keep allowing the wrong direction, eventually you're standing in a hallway being told to leave the house you paid for. What I wish I'd understood sooner is that being a decent person does not mean absorbing whatever is done to you. Decency, real decency, the kind that holds up, has a spine to it. It means treating people well. Yes, but it also means being honest when something is wrong, even when honesty is uncomfortable, even when the person on the other side of it is your own child. I loved my son too much to tell him clearly what I was watching happen. That wasn't kindness. That was avoidance dressed up as kindness. The moment I called my lawyer was the moment things actually began to change. Not because lawyers fix everything. They don't. But because making that call required me to see the situation as it actually was, not as I wished it were. That kind of clear-eyed thinking is hard when you're in the middle of something painful. It requires setting aside what you want to be true and looking at what is true. Once I did that, once I really let myself see it, every next step became obvious. Document, report, file, stand firm. And then stand in the doorway. My son and I are rebuilding something, slowly, on ground that's more honest than what we had before. He's doing his own work. I'm doing mine. I don't know what we'll end up with, but I know it'll be real, because we're not pretending anymore. The yellow kitchen walls turned out exactly right. My late husband always wanted yellow. I spent too long thinking it was his preference, not mine. Turns out it was mine too. I just needed to be the only one deciding